Hi friends, I'm Scott Giles and welcome to Power Talk, my podcast here on Facebook Live and YouTube. I cover topics related to spirituality, hypno-coaching, and the hypnotic arts and sciences generally. If you would like to know more about my professional work, check out my website, which I'll tag at the end of this video. Today I want to talk about logic and the value of logic. Now, full disclosure, I have 2 degrees in philosophy from the University of Connecticut, and they both have a strong emphasis on formal logic. I got into logic because my philosophical interests were not actually in favor in the philosophy department of my time. At that time, the faculty were heavily Marxist in their approach, not just to politics, but to theories of learning, theories of social organization, and so on. Whereas my interest lay in much more spiritual and psychological fields like existentialism and phenomenology. And they would be a topic for a separate podcast, each of them. Far too detailed and complex to cover here. But because some of my professors didn't much care for my interests, I had to put up with a certain amount of hazing from them initially. But I discovered that becoming really good at logic would protect me. I could give any of their arguments a run for the money, and so increasingly they left me alone, free to pursue my own interests. They all felt logic was very important, and it is, but because it is a difficult area of philosophy, they tended not to focus on it, and they left those of us who became logicians alone. And I wasn't alone. A number of other philosophy majors adopted this plan too, and we would have little logic get-togethers where we honed each other's skills by arguing back and forth and writing complex notation on the blackboard. Now, there are 2 branches of logic, informal and formal. Formal logic is almost mathematics. In fact, Bertrand Russell and Whitehead actually wrote a series of books called Principia Mathematica, where they showed that the entire structure of mathematics and calculus could be reduced to logical formulation and set theory. What formal logic does, and it does have its own dedicated notation, it takes arguments and claims and reduces them to formula. And then it unpacks that formula to reveal things that were in there that you might have overlooked and didn't realize were actually entailed. Alternatively, formal logic can be used to illustrate very complicated ideas more simply. Formal logic, therefore, is the basis of linguistics, computer programming, and even cognitive science. It was also one of my specialties. Now, formal logic is deductive. That is, as logicians say, we deduce the conclusion from the prior premises. The conclusion is entailed by the premises in formal steps that are known to be valid. For example, premise: all cats eat food. Second premise: Tabby is a cat. Therefore, conclusion: Tabby eats food. This example is simple, but complicated chains of reasoning can very easily go wrong. And so the value of formal logic is that it breaks things down into careful steps and verifies that each step is solid. It keeps you from making unintentional mistakes. However, formal logic cannot actually lead you to truth. It's got a huge blind spot. It tells you if the steps in your argument do in fact lead to your conclusion, but it can't tell you the value of those steps, that is the premises. It has no way of verifying that your initial arguments are correct. It only shows that the conclusion does descend logically from those arguments. As an example, consider this completely valid logical argument. Either God exists or 7 plus 5 equals 10. 7 plus 5 does not equal 10. Therefore, God exists. Believe it or not, that is a completely valid logical argument, in that the conclusion follows logically from the premises. The problem is that the premises are not sound. There is no reason to believe that adding 7 and 5 together has any connection to the existence of God. So the argument is logical, but not sound. Philosophers know that the quality of the conclusion is only as good as the quality of the premises, or the steps you take to get there. As they say in information technology, garbage in, garbage out. So that's formal logic. Informal logic, and this is the real focus of my talk today, concerns itself with the principles of good argumentation and evidence. That is essential to any form of science, whether social science or hard science. An example of this area of work are the formal fallacies, and these have been worked out since ancient time. The formal fallacies are mistakes in reasoning that it's very easy to make, especially if you have strong feelings about something. And 100 years ago, every student in the equivalent of middle school learned about them and would read arguments with them in mind. And if they detected that a formal fallacy had been made, they would know the argument was bunk. We don't do that anymore. Let me give you an example. One of the best known of the formal fallacies is called post hoc ergo propter hoc, which translates as after this, therefore because of this. What it means that if something happens soon after something else, the human brain automatically suspects a connection and that the former thing caused the latter. On a golf course, someone sneezes, and the person taking a swing just at that moment blows it, and the golf ball goes wild. Did the sneeze cause the golfer to miss the swing? Well, maybe. It's possible to be startled and mess up a golf swing because of that. However, there is no necessary connection. It's quite possible the golfer never heard the sneeze because of distance or wind, or the golfer was hard of hearing and the shot was going to go wild anyway. So the mere fact that the person sneezed and the shot went wild does not mean the sneeze caused the shot to go wild. But a lot of us assume that those kinds of associations are valid, and we see them all the time in political arguments, in romantic arguments, and so on. Because things are associated together does not mean that one caused the other. If I ate some sushi and then came down with food poisoning, that does not mean the sushi caused it, because I may have eaten something else that actually caused it and the sushi was fine. Yet 9 people out of 10 would leap to the unsupported conclusion that the sushi was responsible. We do this all the time. And all the formal fallacies are like that. As I said, 100 years ago, every school child learned the formal fallacies, and I wish they still did, because people make mistakes about them all the time. I almost always see one or two on the editorial page of even major newspapers. Because people today do not know the rules of basic logic, all sorts of problems result. They leap to conclusions that are not supported. They mistake emotion for evidence. I actually believe the failure to understand logic is behind a lot of the social and political chaos in the world today. We as a society have become logically ignorant. This basically means that as a society, we're dumb. We make avoidable mistakes in our thinking all the time. Now, logic isn't perfect, and there are things we do not understand. For example, if you build a computer that runs on strict logical rules and give it a puzzle to solve, it methodically works through all the combinations until it finds the logical outcome. But that's not how people work. If you give a skilled mathematician a problem, he or she doesn't methodically work through all the combinations and all the possibilities. Instead, they use what we call induction, as opposed to deduction, which is what formal logic is about. In induction, the mathematician basically takes a couple of shots at it, and if they're any good, they arrive at the correct answer pretty quickly. And we have no idea how they do that. We have no idea how induction works reliably. But we do know how deduction works. And because we know how deduction works, we all should understand the principles behind it and not fall for the con that goes on every day from pulpits, in newspapers, on television, in politics, and in many other arenas. People assume that something sounds reasonable when it is in fact bogus logic, formal fallacies. I believe the fabric of our civic life together is falling apart because we've basically lost the ability to detect when an argument is logical and valid and when it contains formal fallacies. So it sounds good, but we're fooled and made fools of. I would love to see logic back as a standard part of every high school curriculum, just as it was 100 years ago. They got it right back then. Hey, thank you for your time and attention today. I'll be back next week with another talk on a different subject, and I'd like to invite you to join me. It does help me if you let others know about my videos, so please like, share, and subscribe. And if I can be of help to you, feel free to reach out through my website, email, or my Patreon channel. Stay well and stay safe.